Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RosieCon Book Festival 2021. I am so excited that you can join us this evening. My name is Diane Rogers, and I am the school librarian at Ben Davis Ninth Grade Center in Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm also the founding member and steering committee chair for RosieCon Book Festival. I am so excited that you decided to join us tonight for Romance and Relationships. Tonight's author panel is the second in a series of virtual events, all based on the books and the authors from the Elliott Rosewater Indiana High School book list. This is a recommended reading list of contemporary titles for teens within the state of Indiana. The Rosewater list is renewed every year with new and exciting books and is sponsored by the Indiana Library Federation. Near the end of the school year, teen readers from across Indiana vote for their favorite book from the list, and the winning title is given the Rosewater Award. Voting is online and is currently open, so log on to the Indiana Library Federation website, find the book awards, and vote for your favorite novel. Voting is currently open and will end at the end of April. Before I officially begin events this evening, I do want to thank our sponsors of the festival. Grant money has been donated by the Lilly Endowment for the Arts, the Indianapolis Foundation Library Fund, and Wayne Township Schools to support RosieCon Book Festival. Thank you all for those corporate sponsorships. Now for our panel tonight. It's called Romance and Relationships. This weekend on Sunday is Valentine's Day, so it's the perfect time to talk about love in all of its forms: romantic love, familial love, love between friends. Tonight's moderator is Tara Four. She is the school librarian at Southport High School in Indianapolis. She is also the incoming chair of the Elliott Rosewater Indiana High School Book List Committee. Tara, thank you for being with us tonight. Take it away.
Good evening, RosieCon. I am so excited to be moderating this panel titled Romance and Relationships. But enough from hearing from me. Let's go ahead and meet the authors that we'll be chatting with tonight. First up is Robin Benway.
Hi, hello.
Hi. Robin, do you want to introduce yourself and your books?
I would love to. My name is Robin Benway. I am the author of 6 novels. My most recent one is, happen to have it right here, Far from the Tree. It won the National Book Award. It was a New York Times bestseller. It made my mom very proud. It is about 3 siblings who are all placed for adoption as babies and find each other as teenagers. And it just talks about, what is it that makes a family? Is it blood? Is it time? All the different factors that go into, as you were saying earlier, love, and what makes love love.
Awesome, thank you. Next author is Melissa de la Cruz. Hello.
Hello. Hi guys.
Right. Would you care to talk about some of your books? Blue Bloods was the Elliott Rosewater nominee a few years ago.
Oh, great. I was wondering which one it was. I was like, I don't know if I have it behind me. I'm Melissa de la Cruz, and I'm the author of about 60 some books for teens, adults, and middle grade readers. And these are my latest books behind me: Never After, which is a fun middle grade adventure; The Queen's Assassin, which is a YA fantasy romance; and The Birthday Girl back there is my adult thriller. And Blue Bloods was my vampire series. I had just spent a whole day of school visits, and I just realized the kids from 4th to 8th grade were babies when Blue Bloods was out. So they had no idea, did not know my Blue Blood series at all. So, so kind of funny to have that back. It's like, okay.
So it's always fun chatting with kids and realizing the time. So thank you. Next up is Cami Garcia.
Hi.
Hi. Cami, you've written quite a few books as well. Would you care
Not as many as Melissa. I'm the author of 14 novels and graphic novels. I'm best known for the Beautiful Creatures series. I think that my book for your list, though, is one of my 2 contemporary novels. The Lovely Reckless and Broken Beautiful Hearts are my 2 only contemporaries, and they're both standalones. And most recently, I am writing graphic novels for DC for Teen Titans. So I just did Raven and Beast Boy, which is a lot of fun too.
Graphic novels are fun.
They
Thank
are.
you. Next up is Francesca Zappia, who is actually local to Indianapolis.
Hello.
Hello.
I was going to be last.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Hi, I'm Francesca Zappia. I usually go by Chessie. I believe my Elliot Rosewater novel was Made You Up.
Made You Up and Eliza and Her Monsters.
Eliza was too. Oh my God. Okay. So I've written 3 books. I have them all here. Made You Up and Eliza and Her Monsters are both about like mental illness and finding your support system and lots of different relationships, especially between like siblings and between like parents and children. Definitely some romance in there too, you know. And my latest book, Now Entering Adamsville, is also about family, but there are ghosts and murder. So it's a little different.
Little different than the romance vibes from this evening, but that's okay.
That's okay.
We still love it. And then last but not least, Melanie Crowder.
Everybody.
Hi.
I'm so happy to be on this panel with you all. I'm big fans of all of you. So my 8th book comes out in a couple weeks. I'm super excited. I brought my YA books. So Audacity, historical fiction, labor book. And then this was the Elliot Rosewater title, An Uninterrupted View of the Sky, also historical fiction. And shockingly, also historical fiction. My new book, this one's Maisie. And this one, it comes out in 2 weeks. And it's a big love story for Broadway and Nebraska and New York, and also family and relationships and all that. So that's me. Hi, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. Now that we've all introduced ourselves, and I was told I had to say something important. Hi, Mom. Hope you're watching. Let's go ahead and get started. First things first, the panel is called Romance and Relationships. So when it comes to romance, how do you decide if you're going to incorporate romance in your books? Does it happen naturally, or is it a plan from the beginning? Let's go ahead and start with Melissa.
I do feel that YA, I think romance is a big part of it. At least when I was starting out, that was kind of something that, you know, was kind of natural in the book. I think now that's not quite as true. But when I was starting out writing Blue Bloods and Au Pairs, you know, and this kind of came from being a teen and reading, you know, not just Sweet Valley High, but the Sweet Dreams series. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And all those books, you know, when I was 11 and 12. So I think for me, you know, and the YA books that I write, romance is definitely part of it. And I'm actually really struggling to think of a YA book I've written that doesn't have romance. But, you know, that all that being said, is it like the first thing that I write? Or, you know, or is it something that's part of the story that gets there, you know, maybe obliquely or something? I guess it just depends. I think when I was writing Blue Bloods, which is a vampire series, I definitely thought about the mythology and the world building. And, you know, while there was romance in it, it wasn't the main focus. And then as I was writing more and more in the series, it definitely got a bigger role. And, you know, it just kind of gravitated that way to what my interest was and what the story was. So I am very much a fan of YA romance. I really do like romance in books. So for me, it's definitely planned now after, you know, writing Blue Bloods and writing books after it, you know, it is something that I like to have in the plot.
Awesome. Thank you. Chessie?
Yeah, so I do love romance. I was not able to admit that out loud until like 3 years ago. But it's when I write it, it's kind of, it depends on the main character. Like if the main character, if that's part of their story, their like coming together with another person and understanding that person in a deep way, then there will be a main romance in the book. Sometimes I may say like, ooh, I want a romance in this book. I want them to have a romance with this character. And then as I start writing the book, I realize that the main character's story of romance isn't going to fit in there. And it may not be who they are. It may not be important to what they're going through. So like with Made You Up and Eliza and Her Monsters, the romances in those books were very central to what the main characters were going through. But in Now Entering Adamsville, the main character, Zora, she's asexual. She's struggling with that a little bit, but she wants a romance with another character, and it just doesn't kind of pan out. And then the story diverges from that, because as I was writing, I was like, she'd be interested, but that's not her main issue right now. It's not even like part of what she's considering at the moment. But even then, like I sneak a romance in on the side with some of the side characters. So it's usually always in there in some form with some character. It may not always be the main character though.
You make it happen. Thanks.
Yes.
Okay, Cami?
I was just thinking about this while everyone was talking. All my YA books have romance in them. I have a Joker Harley adult comic series. That's the only thing I've ever written that doesn't have romance in it. And it definitely does not have romance in it. All my YAs do. I mean, it's not always central though. Like the X-Files book that I did, Agent of Chaos, he like Fox has a crush on his friend, and that's part of the story, but it's not like they have a giant romance. Mm-hmm. So some of my books, like there might be a crush or a little bit of a relationship, but Raven is similar in that, where the actual relationship that she develops with her foster sister is the main relationship. Like that's the real relationship that the book's about. And even though she kind of has a crush on this boy and they, go to a dance together, her developing the relationship with her new sister is really like the main one. So I think I agree with Francesca, that depends on the book. In some of my books, like Broken Beautiful Hearts is like, it's a romance, but I call that a happily even after, because that book, that's also the only YA book I've ever written that's definitely like 15 and up. It's older, because it's about a girl who is dealing with relationship violence in like a relationship she has ended, and then has to kind of deal with the fallout from that and start over. So it's kind of like, she gets a little bit of happy, but it's even after like a lot of rough stuff.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. You kind of bring up my next question. Where do you decide to start when you're constructing a relationship in your books, regardless of whatever kind of relationship it might be? Melanie, would you like to start?
Oh, regardless of what kind of relationship?
Well, we can focus on romantic, I guess. Let's start there.
Well, all right. So with Audacity, it was actual historical figure. And so I was actually writing about real people's lives and taking census documents about, who married whom, and then creating a relationship out of that. With the other books, it was more as I came to know the characters and the situations, the relationships built themselves. In Uninterrupted View of the Sky, there is no understanding the main character without understanding his relationship with his father and his younger sister. And in Maisie, this is the first time I've written a true love story. And so I knew from the very beginning that her love interest was going to play a huge role in who she became as a character, and how hard it was for her to find a way into that becoming without leaving who she was and the parts of her that she was proud of behind.
Thank you. Robin?
I was thinking about Far from the Tree, and I realized that all of them have these relationships, these three main characters, and they're all falling apart. They're all in turmoil, they're all fighting, they're dealing with their own life. And so they're also 15, 16 years old, they're not most of us aren't mature enough to handle, the ups and downs of a relationship at times. So I realized that their relationships were very traumatic. And at the same time, I also realized that none of them had friends. And I realized that they had not had friends because their relationships were taking up so much of the book, and it was going to be hard to work in friendships. But in terms of like planning it and plotting it, the oldest sister is Grace, and she becomes pregnant. The oldest sister, she's 16, she becomes pregnant and is pretty much, abandoned by the father of her child. His parents are like, we're signing away all rights, you're going to college, you're not going to be a part of this baby's life. And I just thought, she's not going to have a relationship because she's healing, she's working through this trauma. And I put a scene where she's in the bathroom, crying over this experience at school. And a boy walks in accidentally to the girls' room at the school, and he became a love interest. And when he walked in, I thought, well, who are you? Like, you weren't supposed to be here. You were supposed to be a friend. And Rafe just became this lovely character. So I think it's really fun to stay open to things like that, whether it's romantic or friendship. I think sometimes you as the writer aren't always in charge of who's going to walk in through the door. And, being open to surprises like that is always really nice, I think.
It's like they write themselves. It's great.
Yeah. I love when they do that. It's great.
Right. Cami, you talked a little bit about this earlier. Did you have a particular thought on where you can start when you write a relationship?
I mean, I'm a plotter, so I usually either start with, depending on the story, the character or the plot. With Broken Beautiful Hearts, I knew I was going to be writing a story about someone who experiences relationship violence and how she kind of rebuilds her life. So I kind of knew that much about the plot, and then I thought about who she was, but I kind of thought a little bit about the boy, but not until I got to know her better, because I really wanted to think about I usually like us to write a story where the people are kind of rescuing each other. So I wanted to think about what kind of boy would she meet, and what kind of boy would like her, and what kind of boy would she like. So it's, for me, so I basically take a notebook when I start, and I write down, I just start writing. I write not narrative, but lists of things about the characters, things about the plot. And then after a while, the puzzle pieces start to fit enough for me to really start making a real plot. So it's just kind of I kind of agree a little bit with Robin. It's sometimes things jump out or become really interesting when I'm making those lists and I'm brainstorming that I didn't think would be the main thing. And I kind of, but then I'm well, that's really interesting. And maybe she would like this boy. And so then I kind of have to make decisions about, also like Francesca said, what is there room for, what really belongs, what's the, main heart of a story. And I think that's the trick for every author is I call it excavating, we have to dig around and figure out what is the real story we're trying to tell. And sometimes that's easy and sometimes it's harder.
Yeah, thank you. Melissa?
Yes.
Where do you start? You've written so many books. How do you start constructing a relationship?
It's funny. I was thinking about what my answer would be well, he's got to be hot, right? Start with two hot people.
It's your story. You do what you want.
It's funny. I mean, when I wrote Bluebirds, I didn't really know who she was going to end up with. It's such a lie. I knew she was going to end up with Jack. Spoiler, but whatever. Yeah, but there was a relationship in the book that I, also didn't know how that was going to end. And it is something where you kind of write them, and you write them bantering, and you write, the conflict, and you see how they react. And, it's kind of different parts of your psyche are reacting to certain things. And then sometimes they have chemistry, and then you're just kind of into it. And there's maybe some characters who are friends, or they were enemies and then they become friends. I actually kind of like those because they feel very natural. Because, I always tell my 14-year-old, life isn't like books. That's fiction. And, I always tell her that the boys are just as confused and insecure, and, they're just human. because when you're 14 and you like boys and you've been writing these books, they're just these wonderfully mysterious, handsome, brooding creatures. And, we kind of idealize that like as this, in our heads, but they're not characters, and I think sometimes now I do try to write, maybe a little bit more realistic and not as fantasy in the romance, like what is a good partner? Like, who do you want your boyfriend to be? And I think we've kind of made a lot of strides as a culture to what we want in a relationship. Yeah, so I don't know. I think I started out, just wanting, some chemistry, some attraction. And then now I think, we want more. We want more in our romance.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. What is your favorite type of relationship to write about? And is there a particular kind that you feel is important to portray? Chessie?
Oh no. I say oh no because like my immediate thought was all of them. But I do love romances. I love romances that are very, I love hate to love romances, but I think it's because it kind of jives with the, it kind of jives with asexuality a little bit because like for me, the physical attraction at the outset, I'm like, no, I don't, doesn't make any sense. So I want like that mental connection of some kind. It can be hatred. It can be like, oh, we love the same thing right away. Like we know, oh, can we be best friends? It's that like spark of there's something about you that I love or hate or bugs me or something, but something about you is important. I love that kind of relationship. And because there's so many opportunities to make it so deep and like have all of those twists and turns in it where, you hated each other so much. And then you get to see little by little how they come to understand each other and help one another and get tied closer and closer together until they're like, oh no, we understand each other. We trust one another, even though like we may not love each other, but I trust you. And by the end, it's like, you are my person. I trust you more than anybody else. You know more about me than anybody else. I want to hang out with you. When I have something to say, I want to say it to you. Like that's my favorite kind of relationship, I think, is that kind that just starts off like, there's something about you and I don't know what it is, and ends up being this very tightly woven kind of thing.
Melanie?
So I was going to say, when you said that, I was like nodding. I was like, I got something to say. And then I was trying to think of one of my books that actually uses this thing that I'm going to say. And I think I would have to go to my middle grades to find it. But relationships between female friends and relationships between sisters. So I am one of 3 sisters, and they're my best friends in the whole world, as an adult. And I feel like in so much media, and maybe it's the books that people of a certain age, of my age, grew up with, and the stories that we grew up with, there was all of this cattiness and the fact that the idea of a mean girl is even a label that's given to human beings who are just trying to figure out how to exist in a society that isn't kind to them necessarily. And when we battle against things that are not necessarily treating us well, sometimes it brings out traits that aren't perfect. And I hate that there's this trope of female friendships that are just venomous and ripping one another apart, or this idea that sisterhood is by nature some kind of wicked thing. And so that's a relationship that I feel is really important to portray in a way that is complex and real and true, and not always roses and butterflies, but also not falling into this trope that's going to put young women into a box where they don't belong.
Good. I like we don't want to be in a box.
Yeah.
It's out of the box. Robin?
Found family. I love found family. I love, like, the minute you asked the question, I was like, I know the answer to this one immediately. I think that's such a big part of growing up too, is figuring out who your family is and how you define that. I think when you're very, very young, it's your parents, your guardians, whoever those people may be. But as you get older, you start to look for the people that are supporting you and that do have your back. And like friend, like, is it Chesky? Did I say that right? I'm sorry.
Chessie.
I'm sorry. Like you were saying about the idea of like that person that you zone in on, you're like, why are you important to me? I think a lot of times you don't get to choose your biological family, but when you start to make those connections with people, I think that's so important. And I think that's how you grow up, is you figure out how to surround yourself with people that are supportive. And I realized sort of that every single one of my books, whether there were siblings or not, they all had that, sort of my friends are my family. And that's also, again, a thing at 16, I would have laid down in front of a truck for my friends. You just friendship, especially female friendship, is so intense and passionate. And yeah, I think those relationships are so important. So yeah, I could write found family all day. If my editor would let me, I would do that in a heartbeat.
You actually just brought up my next question. So family and friends can look so many different ways. How do you design those relationships? Cami?
Hold on, I'm not muted. Okay. So I think I agree with Robin. Like I want, and also with Melanie, like I want them to feel real. Like I don't want them to be super perfect. I have 4 brothers. So I had a couple girlfriends, but I grew up with mostly boys. And I was also really picky about who my girlfriends were, because they were going to get stuck spending all this time with my brothers and my brother's friends. So, they had to be tolerant of all these dudes. And, my brother's weird antics. So I think like, I try to think about what attracts me to people. And usually I think it's kind of like someone who who is different than me, who has things that I don't have, things that I admire, or, like a lot of my friends usually are super patient, and like I'm like very impatient, and I don't want to stand in line, and I don't want to wait for anything. And I feel like, especially when I was a teenager, my friends filled in the holes, like the things that I didn't know how to do, or I was trying to figure out about myself. And because I would pick people that had these traits that I admired. And so like they usually had traits that like I didn't have, or I could not figure out. like I really wanted to be patient and like, understanding and introspective, but I was just like very, like unfiltered and, like explosive. And so I think that's part of it, is like, who would my character be attracted to as a friend, but also like who will help them grow? Because in my friendships, all my friends have helped me grow as a person. They have either taught me things or taught me things about myself, like, well, actually, you are this way, even though you think you're not. I used to always tell people, like, I really don't like meeting new people. And then, my friends would be like, well, you like always talk to new people, so how can you not like meeting new people? So like, sometimes it's interesting to see yourself through someone else's eyes, the way they view you. And I think as a teen, especially, sometimes that's how we see what's special about us. So I try to think about who is going to fill in those gaps for my characters. And also like, I do like characters that like fuss with each other, like where they're arguing or bickering, but they still love each other. Cause that's how my brothers and I were. Like they drove me nuts all the time, but I still like love them. So I like to show that kind of thing too. And I had a friend who had all sisters, and her sisters were the same. They always were bickering and yelling at each other. But like if anyone else like came, and tried to yell at one of them, they would have a fit. So I try to capture those kinds of things, because I do think it's really important when teens read. I was a teacher for 17 years before I became a writer. And one of the things I found was that, kids are always looking for themselves and how to figure out the world in books. And so I want to give them a world that's a little bit messy, so that when they look at their own life, they realize like, okay, my life is messy, but so is everyone else's.
And I think that accountability having somebody else like give you feedback from their eye. That, yes, I experienced that too from my friends. So thank you. Melanie, you are also a fellow teacher. Have you kind of seen different relationships with family and friends that kind of have influenced your books?
Well, for sure. And also my relationships with the young people who I interact with. Right now, I came home from school and I was just teaching 7th grade English. And then I took off the masks and everything. And here I am. To say that being around those developing, like becoming humans doesn't affect me and how I perceive my characters would be wild. I take inspiration from my friendships, from my sisters, like I said, my own children, they're 4. I'm not writing for that age, but I feel like when we're writers, we're just kind of walking around all the time, just kind of tasting the air and waiting for that little burst of inspiration that's going to turn into another story. I'm not really answering your question, but I'm moving to answer a question that you didn't ask. But when I first started writing, I was like, no, I only have one idea. I have to write this one idea because I only have one idea. And now that I've been writing for I've been publishing for about 10 years now, I have so many ideas. I don't have enough time to write them all. And so I feel like my antenna are up and now I just have to tell those stories like, wait for me, please wait for me. I will make time for you. I will get to you. I promise. I hope they wait. We'll see.
Those are like lines in a romance novel. Just like, just wait for me.
Romance panel. So.
Chessie, do you have, how do you design relationships with friends and family in your books?
It's kind of, it's funny because like the friends and family relationships always, they feel like they come out so much easier than the romance relationships. Like the romance takes a little bit of finessing, I guess. The family relationships, and I think Cami said this earlier, like you kind of have to know the main character before you can make any relationships surrounding them. But it's like, once I know even like the smallest little bit about the main character, it's kind of like, okay, I know what family they have around them and I know kind of how those family members function. So like, and it's always really important to me to make those family members feel like real people. Like they would feel like my brother and sister or my parents or parents that I've known or siblings that I've known of my friends. So like when I was writing Eliza and Her Monsters, I knew that that was based so much on my own experiences too. I was like, okay, her parents immediately are going to be fitness people, fitness nerds, and she is so not about that at all. And they have that disconnect where they don't quite understand her, but they're still very loving people. And then one of my favorite relationships in that book is with her 2 younger brothers, who are also like very much like her parents, where it's like they love sports, they love doing young teenage boy things, and they, on the surface level, they just don't seem to click with her. Like she feels like an outsider even with her own family. But I knew right from the start that like her brothers actually do understand her, and she just doesn't realize it. And that was like the deepening of their relationship was of both her parents and her brothers, actually, because it's that reveal of like her parents don't understand what she's into, what she's doing, and her brothers do. And like that kind of extra level to her family, but all that was there from the beginning because it was just kind of, I've seen this family dynamic before. I know exactly what this looks like. I know how this would play out. And I know what kind of people I want them to be. So it's kind of that 2 things. Like I've seen this before and I know who I want these people to be. If I wanted them to be bad parents, it would have been the same dynamic, but it would have gone a different path. But it's like, they're good parents. They just don't understand her. So it's usually, it's a combination of 2 factors, I guess, for any given like family relationship or friendship would work the same way. Like I've seen these kinds of friends before. And this is like, I have a beginning and an end point. It's like, this is how I want them to be. I want them to be good friends. So this is kind of the trajectory.
Thank you. So to kind of switch gears a little bit, Melissa and Melanie both write historical and romance. Talk a little bit about that. Melissa, would you start?
Sure. So I wrote a book series called Alex and Eliza, which was based on Alexander Hamilton and Elizabeth Schuyler's love affair. And, you know, I kind of went into it thinking, oh, I can do this. You know, I can do research and I can write romance. And it was really hard, you know, because it's not like fantasy where you're making stuff up. I mean, there's a history there. There's a way people lived. There's a way that society functioned. So you had to do a lot of research to make it real. And it was a lot harder than I thought. So, and what was interesting about it was, you know, we kind of know how it ended, right? And I, you know, while I know that about my stories, I always like to know the ending. In this way, you know, the romance has been told. We know a lot about how they lived and what happened. So I had to, you know, kind of make it new for me. You know, what is my version of that romance? And I felt like I could write it because she forgave him. You know, he famously cheated on her, wrote about it, admitted to it, broke her heart. But in the end, she forgave him and she took him back. And so I felt like I could celebrate their relationship because of her forgiveness. I think her forgiving him made me forgive him as well, and, you know, allowed me to think of him still as a romantic hero. Although it was still kind of heartbreaking to get to that point, you know, and my editor and I were like, can't we just change it? Can't we make it so, you know, he never did that? But that's part of the story. And so I think in that way, you're kind of limited because you're writing a historical, you know, and you're writing a story that everybody already knows. So you can't change certain things.
A lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Melanie?
Yeah, so Maisie is set in 1959. So it's recent, but for young readers, it doesn't feel recent. And so the challenge with that book is making the relationship feel relatable for young readers today without being anachronistic, without like losing faith or breaking faith with the time period. That's a huge challenge, not just with the way that characters speak to one another, but also with situations. You think, you know, so Maisie, in order to chase her big Broadway dream, she has to leave her family behind. She has to leave her hometown behind. She has to leave her love behind. She has to get away from everything in order to follow her dreams. But so there she is, a teenager in New York City, you know, all of a sudden around all of these adults. And it actually isn't all that different from the situation she encountered, aren't all that different from what was coming out at the time when I was writing it with the Me Too movement and the things that you encounter in a professional workplace. Even though this was taking place, you know, in the middle of the last decade, a lot of these issues that she was facing, trying to stand on her own and find her own place in this industry that she loves so much and would give anything to be a part of, but then she discovers has some really rough aspects to it, especially in 1959, the way that young women were treated and the way that, you know, young women in the workforce today are still treated sometimes. And being able to come to grips with that, finding a way for her relationship to feel authentic and true and relevant today, while also being, you know, in reality, you know, the age of current readers' grandparents or great grandparents, and making that all feel relatable and fresh and vibrant. I love historical fiction because you get to take just these little just niblets of historical detail and just sprinkle them through the story. And if you've done it well, which I hope I have, then that timeline, it just comes alive for readers and they get to experience a world that they would maybe never have learned about before. So That's the hope.
Thank you. You mentioned keeping things fresh. So there are so many, I'm an avid reader of YA romance as well. So there are so many romance and relationships tropes out there. How do you keep love stories original? Robin, you want to start?
Like, don't call on me.
Look at me.
I was at a wedding a couple, back in the before times when people went to weddings and we did stuff like that. But there was, I was talking to somebody and I said, I write stories and I write novels. And he just looked at me and he goes, there are no original ideas anymore. And I was like, okay. But then I was like, but I thought, how many love songs are out there? There are millions of love songs and it's all about perspective. And what we have to remember is that just because, maybe I'm older, I've had more experiences, we're writing for young people that are experiencing these feelings for the first time in like very intense ways. And so it is fresh, it is new, and it is an original thing to them that they're experiencing it. And I think it's all about the perspective of the character. It's about the newness of the situation and the circumstance that they can't control. And I think those are ways that you can keep it fresh and interesting. Again, love is such a, millennium concept, but you can make it fresh and new every single time just by varying the point of view of who's ever telling you about the romance. So that's how I attack. And that's what I told him at the wedding too. So.
Cami?
It's so tricky. I feel like there might not be any new tropes. I agree. Like there's friends to lovers, there's like enemies to lovers, but I feel like if the characters are really well written and feel very real, then it's always going to be a fresh take because those two people have never had a romance. And every romance between two people, regardless of, anything, like their sexual orientation, their cultural background, where they live, like, are they in an urban school or a rural school? Is it summer or is it during a school year and they're passing notes? Like, I just feel like all of those tiny decisions, like, create these ripples that affect the romance. And so the key is really developing the characters so they are really real and interesting, because then when they interact, like they're, no two, girls are going to respond exactly the same to a statement or to, like I have friends who love, public displays and to get like flowers and things like that. Like my worst nightmare was like someone proposing to me in public. I was like, just thinking like, if that happens, he's definitely not who I should marry because he doesn't know me very well. So I just think it's all about that. Like what Robin's saying, perspective, where is your character coming from and how do they perceive that other person? And also like, do they perceive them, accurately? Does the other person have a crush on them and they get that? Or does the other person have a crush on them and act weird? And then they're just like, oh, this guy is such a jerk. Like he's so rude. He's so awkward. And, really he's like crazy about her, but he's, he is a little awkward. So I think it's just all about how the interplay works. And I definitely think maybe all stories, all types of genre stories have been told, but I don't think that the individual stories have been told, even when the characters are the same. Some, if it's a year later, they're going to be different.
Melissa?
Yeah, I don't know. I like tropes, I like those things. There's certain things that you don't, experience in your head, but you kind of experience in a feeling. And I do think that if you do it well, it makes it new. But I also think that, for our readers, we're writing for kids, it's all new to them. My kid is 14 and she's just discovering these tropes, and she, she's like, oh, I totally love enemies to lovers trapped in an elevator, have to wear his pajamas, and they're, making TikToks about it and they're reading it. And she made me read this Wattpad book that they were all obsessed with. And it was a Harry Potter fan fiction with Draco, of course. Draco is the king of Harry Potter fan fiction. I read it and I said, well, nothing happens. Like literally, it was just a lot of sighing and a lot of, looking at him, and he smirks a lot, and it was just so funny to me because, they were obsessed with this, and really nothing happened, except for this whole, idea that he was this bad boy who was in love, that they were in love with. So yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit of a traditionalist, in that way, and I think you do have to write, it to be original for yourself. I think you need to enjoy that romance, So I'm always joking that I've run out of boyfriends to write about. If only I dated more guys, But in a way, all the characters are also, based on a little bit of the emotional experience of being in love. So I keep rewriting my love story, which is kind of funny. Don't tell my kid that, to cringe so hard. So I think, as long as you make it new for you and you make it original. I just saw there was like a romance book where the narrator was autistic, and it was like all about having Asperger's. So I thought that was really fascinating. I was like, oh, I want to read that. What's that like? Yeah.
Well, speaking of what you're reading, a Q&A, what books are you currently loving right now? Speaking of romance and relationships, what do we love to read right now? Melanie, you want to start?
I love anything by Anna Marie McLemore. She's amazing. They are amazing. Apologies. I am so impressed with the variety and the lyricism in the language, and it's amazing.
Awesome. Melissa?
I just bought Winter Keep by Christian Kishore. I was a huge, huge Graceling fan. I love that series, so I'm really, really excited to read it. It's next to my bed, and I actually have been like, kind of savoring just having it. I'm like, when will I read it? Not today, then it'll be over. So, so I've been waiting for the right moment.
Jessie?
So I'm trying to get through my TBR pile right now, so I haven't been reading a lot of YA, but right now I'm reading, I just a little bit ago finished the 4th book in the Dune series.
Oh.
And it's so good. Nobody told me how good it was. People told me, I didn't listen. So I've been reading Dune, and it's just, my brain is running out through my ears. But other books that I just constantly think about, N.K. Jemison's The 5th Season. Amazing. I bought the other 2 books and I'm so excited to start reading them. I think I'm going to start the 2nd one tonight. I was thinking about it again, and it was like, I felt such crisp emotions reading The 5th Season. I couldn't, it was like she just gets right down to your core.
I love when books do that. Robin?
I don't read a lot of YA. I don't read YA when I'm drafting YA, just because it's just too much. But I just handed in a book 2 weeks ago, so now I'm like, everything's on my list. What am I going to read? When I was writing the book, I got really into the Tana French murder novels that are about the Dublin murder squad, and I would jokingly say to my family, I'm like, I'm just going to go relax and find out who committed a murder in Dublin. I'm just going to unwind. And now one of the books that I'm so excited to read is Courtney Summers' The Project, that just came out last week. I loved Sadie with all of my heart. I just loved her storytelling, and I love how she writes. So just that dark side of being a woman and being female that you don't always get to access in public. And I love that she can tap into that. And I'll read anything she writes. So I'm so excited to see what happens to The Project, and I will probably not sleep after reading it. So
All-nighter.
exactly, yeah.
Cami?
So I recently read, which I love, it's not out yet. It's a romance called The Meet Cute Diary, and it's by Emery Lee. And it's very like just the circumstance for the characters are like nothing I've read before. And it's also, I mean, it's funny because it made me feel super old too, because it's like, the characters are like doing all these kind of like contemporary social media things that like I never did. But it's really well done. I also recently just loved Jennifer Niven's Breathless, which is very much about firsts. And I have very fond memories of, reading Judy Blume's Forever and like all the weird, and this to me is kind of like the modern Forever, because it's about like, your first time falling in love, like all these firsts that to me, like before I had any firsts and I was like reading those kinds of books, I was like so fascinated by. I was like, I wonder if it's gonna be like when someone kisses me. I wonder if it's gonna be like when I fall in love, and then like nothing would happen and I'd be super disappointed. But it's great. And I also liked Cemetery Boys a lot by Aiden Thomas. And that's a great queer romance, but it's just also, I think it's like what Melanie talks about, just the writing is so gorgeous. And I'm not like a super gorgeous writer at all. Like my writing is very like story centered. I always feel like I'm more like a scribe than, like I'm like trying to write down what the characters are saying in my head more so than, I don't know that I'm as lyrical as some people. So when I read that kind of writing, I'm always like just super impressed. Historical too. Like I think I could write a murder historical, like Jack the Ripper or something easily, but like a love story set in the past, I don't know. I think that would be really hard.
Believe in you. I think you could do it. So, speaking of challenges, what is something that you haven't attempted yet, but you think you could do it?
You mean like in my books?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, if you're talking about real life, there's an infinite number of things I can't do.
Sorry.
There's a lot of them. Well, this is not very romantic, but I definitely eventually am going to write an adult serial killer novel, like thriller, for sure. That's like my jam. That's my wheelhouse. And that's kind of what Joker, Harley, Criminal Sanity was kind of like my training wheels, because it's basically a reimagining. It's like Joker as, the serial killer he is, but Harley as a profiler who's hunting him. And I just think there are so many amazing investigators and like psychiatrists out there that are women. And of course, I think like oftentimes we are very intuitive. So I think we're very, uniquely positioned to solve crimes. And so I think I'll do that eventually, but I also think it's like, I'm like Melissa, I do a lot of research. And so I feel like I have to keep researching stuff until like just the proper murder surfaces for me.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm curious, Melissa, if there's a trope that you haven't written yet that you want to write about, if you can tell us.
Right. I think I've covered a lot. I've done friends to lovers, enemies to lovers.
What about stalkers? Like I could see you doing like a single white female. Like the person who's trying to be.
Did they fall in love after?
No.
Yeah. No. I don't think I've done the Cinderella one. Where it's like he's a secret billionaire or some kind of rich man. And that's because I don't like that trope. I don't like even Mr. Darcy and all his carriages. I wasn't into it. I like the reality bites, poor artsy guys. I do not like the billionaires. I was like, who wants to fall in love with a billionaire? Have you ever met them?
Boring.
Robin, is there any sort of trope or romance that you would want to write about that I haven't yet?
Oh, Lord. I'm trying to think. I don't think I would do enemies to, I'm doing the opposite of not answering your question, but I don't think I would do enemies to lovers well, just because I would get so angry at, like, on behalf of whoever the main character was at the time, that I'd be like, he's a jerk. Like, I'm kind of with Mel, like, I never liked Mr. Darcy. I'm like, he's just mean the whole time. Like, I never was able to wrap my head around that. And all of my friends, you know, were like, no, it's Mr. Darcy. I don't know. That's a really good question. I feel like I don't really write tropes. I just write like boy and girl meet and they fall in love, or, you know, in Far From the Tree, girl and girl meet and they have ups and downs. And I feel like I haven't done that. I would love to try my hand at like an adult rom-com one day. I think that would be really fun, but that is not at all on the table at this moment in time, but maybe someday. But
Chessie, how about you?
I would love to write two, it's kind of the same thing, but on two diverging paths. One way, it's like the big epic, like fantasy story with the big epic romance. That's one way. The other way is the big epic fantasy story where the two characters eventually, they're just trying to destroy each other, and everything, it's like eldritch gods, and we're gonna fight to the death of the world. And like, I want to do both of those in separate stories.
That's a duology right there. There you go. And Melanie.
Well, like I said, Maisie's my real first romance, so there's a lot of unexplored territory here, for me anyway. But I love that trope of some form of reincarnation or multiverse or whatever, where the characters meet in several different lifetimes. And I love that. And I would love to write that. And it sounds super ambitious and complicated, and I totally want to do it.
I think you could do it. And Diane is here, so that means we're wrapping up. So.
Hey, yeah, I was gonna say I'm the time clock, the timekeeper here. So goodness, that was a super awesome, fantastic panel. Thank you to all the authors who've participated tonight. I really appreciate it. Let me give a shout out for the audience. There is Felina Martinez is my tech support on the back end. You guys don't see her, but we see her. So thank you, Felina. I do want to also say thank you, audience members, for participating. I jumped on YouTube for a minute there, and we have, you know, as I expected, we have more YouTube streamers than we do here within Zoom, which is perfectly fun. And so please remember that tonight's events are part of a series. So in 2 weeks' time, we have our next panel with RosieCon, and that panel is going to be called The Therapist is In. Francesca will be on that one again, and I'm gonna quickly put up the, I don't know if I just, at the end of the night, I forget what I'm doing. Let me share my screen. And there we go. Okay, so this is the panel in 2 weeks. So please make sure that you log on to Eventbrite and sign up for this panel. And this one is all about The Therapist is In. So we have Sean Goodman, Mindy McGinnis, Sandra Uringiyama. Thank you. I listened to that 10 times today and I still messed it up. Wendelin Van Dronen and Francesca Zappia. And the moderator for that night is going to be Nicole Dieter-Smith, who's another one of our fellow Elliott Rosewater Committee members. So join us in 2 weeks for that. And thank you everyone for tonight. It's been great. Bye everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much. Bye everybody.
Bye.